Britain is technically richer than ever, but it doesn't feel that way for most young people. The wealthiest in the UK live comfortably among the global elite, with the top 3% of households pulling in an average £80,000 annually after tax. But that's where the good news ends. As you move down the income ladder, the picture becomes much grimmer. For Britain's poorest 5%, life is a constant struggle. Their living standards are now 20% lower than those in Slovenia, a country with a far smaller economy. It's staggering to think that a nation known for its wealth lags behind Eastern European countries when it comes to supporting its most vulnerable. The middle class hasn't been spared either. Since 2007, the gap between the UK's average household income and that of northwestern Europe has widened from 8% to 20%, despite ranking 9th on the worldwide leaderboard for total GDP. When it is divided on a per capita basis, the ranking drops to 27th. Britain is becoming a society where wealth is concentrated at the top, while the rest of the population struggles to keep up. The promise of prosperity is increasingly out of reach for the younger generation, so let's talk about net worth by age. For those under 42, the outlook is miserable. While the total national wealth sits at 12.8 trillion, younger generations hold only a sliver of it. The average Britain's net worth is £172,000, but for those aged 16 to 24, it's a meagre £7,600. Compare that to the over 65s, who boast net worths ranging from £500,000 to £1 million, and you start to see the depth of the gap. The issue, of course, stems largely from asset ownership. Nowadays, most wealth is created by obtaining an asset that appreciates in value over time, while 36% of the UK's total wealth is tied up in property assets. Young people have been left out of the housing market. Millennials, in particular, are often referred to as the renting generation. It's no wonder 40% of people between the ages of 22 and 29 have no savings at all. Student debt, rising living costs, and stagnating wages mean there's little left to save. Just look at this graph showing the growth of wages compared to growth of house prices. Wealth gained through asset ownership has risen much faster than income, and those aged 55 to 64 have most of the wealth. So young people should just obtain assets. Well, it's not that simple. Once upon a time, owning a home was a standard milestone on the journey to adulthood. Today, it's transformed into a near unattainable privilege, and young people are watching from the sidelines as property prices continue to soar. 40 years ago, it took the average couple about 3 years to save for a deposit. Now, it takes 9 years, 15 if you live in London, and as mortgage rates rise, the dream of home ownership drifts even further out of reach. The harsh reality is that young adults today aren't saving 3 to 5 times more than their parents did. Instead, they're relying increasingly on the bank of mum and dad. This graph shows that back in 1999, only 25% of first-time buyers received financial help from their parents. By 2019, that number had more than doubled to 54%. The decline in home ownership among young people is entrenching inequality. Among 35-year-olds in Britain, 58% of those with home-owning parents have managed to buy property. For those without that advantage, the figure drops to a dismal 27%. Even when earnings are comparable, young adults with wealthier parents are more likely to own homes, and those homes are typically of higher value. This growing divide is set to worsen. Economists predict that over the next 50 years, the link between parental wealth and home ownership will double. So what happens if you don't have wealthy parents to rely on? For many in Gen Z, the idea of financial security increasingly hinges on inheritance. With traditional paths to wealth, like a well-paying career and savings, blocked by soaring property prices and stagnant wages, inheritance has become the fallback plan for those lucky enough to have affluent families. But for the majority, it's more of a fantasy than a lifeline. Over £100 billion flow down the generations each year. An additional £11 billion is passed down through lifetime gifts from parents to children. Altogether, these wealth transfers are equivalent to the entire value of the UK's housing stock. In theory, this sounds promising, but it's only good news for the minority who stand to inherit a good amount. For those without wealthy parents, nothing can be done. They are constantly being told that they'll own nothing and be happy. This phrase, once dismissed as a conspiracy theory, is beginning to sound entirely accurate. With home ownership increasingly out of reach for younger generations, a narrative is emerging. Young people should abandon the dream of owning property or significant assets and instead find happiness in experiences, luxury goods, and renting forever. But is this really an acceptable future? The rise in wealth inequality suggests otherwise. Nearly half of young adults are living with their parents. The highest number since the Great Depression. Instead of gaining wealth through asset ownership, they're being sold the idea that happiness can be found in temporary pleasures, concert tickets, the latest fashion labels, or short trips discovered on Instagram. But the idea that consumerism can replace the long-term security of owning a home feels like a flimsy solution to a much deeper issue. And how about those who did things the correct way? Work hard, get the best grades, and graduate from a good university. Surely that would guarantee a stable, well-paying job to at least put them on a positive path. Unfortunately, for today's graduates, this is far from reality. Degrees that once served as golden tickets to secure employment are now leading to insecure, low-paid work in a brutally competitive job market. Graduates are entering a landscape filled with frustration. Even those with impressive qualifications are struggling to find jobs in their chosen fields. Recent data shows that while 61% of graduates secured full-time employment within 15 months, less than 2/3 of those were in high-skilled work. The rest are trapped in low-skilled roles or left unemployed, despite having qualifications that should open doors. Graduates from prestigious universities with degrees in sought-after fields like STEM are applying to hundreds of jobs, only to be met with rejection or worse, silence. There's a growing trend of British companies requiring multiple years of experience for an entry-level job. They're no longer willing to invest in raw talent, instead valuing experience much more. Other ways to stand out include internships and work placements, but most are now either unpaid or inaccessible due to financial constraints. With the rising cost of living, the expectation that young graduates can afford to work for free just to get a foot in the door seems absurd. Meanwhile, those who manage to find jobs often do so through connections rather than merit. Nepotism, similar to luck-based inheritance, is on the rise, gradually becoming the sole factor in determining a young person's future. The mental health toll is immense. The job hunt can feel soul-crushing as graduates invest time and effort into endless applications that rarely yield results. Unfortunately, this is now a world where traditional paths to success are less important. The gap between generations has widened, and young people find themselves realizing that hard work and sacrifice may not be enough to guarantee security. So what are the consequences? I'm afraid we are seeing them already. Exponential rises in mental health problems, a generation addicted to algorithms that can provide temporary but limitless doses of dopamine to counteract the realities of life. A feeling of injustice, bitterness, and resentment ultimately leads to a more volatile, unstable society. This is not their fault. It is the result of decades of government failure and generational greed. Let's hope that the future turns course to at least give young people a chance before they think of themselves as failures. Thank you for watching.